and welcome to the China's Messaging podcast created by the Center for Latin American and Latino Studies at the American University in Washington, D.C. I'm your host, Luiza Duarte. Join me today to talk about China's public diplomacy are Robert Albro of the Center here at the AU, Monica DeHart of the University of Puget Sound, and Claudia Trevisan, Executive Director of the Brazil-China Business Council. We will discuss what distinguished China's public diplomacy in Latin America and the Caribbean, including the establishment and expansion of Confucius Institutes, promotion of Chinese culture, and increasing opportunities to people exchange and academic cooperation. The cultural aspect of China-Latin American relations has been articulated by the Chinese government in the expression people-to-people connection. Over the past decade, the growing network of Confucius Institute teaching Mandarin and hosting events, as well as academic and diplomatic exchanges, have been among the principal instruments of China's public diplomacy, and today's episode affords an opportunity to explore these developments. Robert, Monica, and Claudia, it's a pleasure to have you here. Expanding contacts between China and Latin American countries is a strategic priority for Chinese foreign policy. How has China gone about developing its public diplomacy profile in Latin America in recent years? Monica, I would like to hear your take on that.
Thank you, Luiza. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I think I would characterize China's public diplomacy in Latin America as both building on strategies it's used elsewhere in the world, as in Africa in the 1960s, 70s, and so forth, and also new ways of working that are trying to be more adaptive to Latin America, even as China is very slowly learning what that might look like. In the case that I know best, in Central America, for example, one of the primary and original ways that China was trying to do public diplomacy was through things like stadium diplomacy. This was a strategy that China had used in Africa, building what we would call first world fancy national sports stadiums, much like the Bird's Nest that people were familiar with in the Beijing 2008 Olympics across the country, and has a series of construction firms that are devoted to doing these modular projects. When Costa Rica changed diplomatic relations from Taiwan to the People's Republic of China in 2007 and became the first Central American nation to embrace that diplomatic relationship, China gifted Costa Rica a new stadium and brought over 700 workers to help build that big stadium, really producing this amazing, again, people would refer to it locally as this first world stadium that brought them notoriety and status regionally and really allowed them to entertain all sorts of international guests and soccer games and other events that put them on the map. That same strategy is now being used in El Salvador, which also has switched sides and gone to the PRC just recently. And again, this strategy is not new in Central America because Taiwan, as the previous Chinese partner, had been building baseball stadiums and doing other kinds of public outreach in this way as well. But it's a strong favorite. Another way that China is doing this public diplomacy, I would say, is commercial expositions or joint commercial expos. And these are benign commercial-looking events in which young Chinese companies are coming over to Latin America and holding an exposition to sort of display their wares and get a foothold in the local market. But these are often accompanied by a large display section that is very much embodying that people-to-people impulse because it shows the Great Wall and the Forbidden City alongside high-speed trains, big tableaus of the ethnic diversity in China along with its high-tech possibilities. And so in many of these cases, it's not just wooing the public to the idea of trade with China, which has increasingly become enacted through free trade agreements with multiple countries, but also the idea of China as a developed country, one with its own prowess and benefits and cultural advantages that people might embrace. One final note I'll make is, again, familiarization tours. And I think we're used to seeing those at top diplomatic levels, officials traveling to China on the Chinese purse in order to see and understand China better. But the other way that that's been happening a lot is for young Chinese diasporic communities, so longstanding ethnic Chinese communities in Latin America. youth from those groups being taken to China and toured around in order to sort of see the development, the urban highlights, and the cultural sophistication and cosmopolitanism of China in a way that would be very foreign to them given their families' trajectories or maybe even strained relationship with mainland China, increasingly building on those for academic grants at Chinese institutions to get higher degrees and to learn Mandarin. These become a way that a new generation Latin Americans of Chinese descent are increasingly becoming potentially brokers or proponents of Chinese public diplomacy.
Claudia, what do you think?
One interesting thing that Monica raised is this image of China as emerging technological power. I think there was this increase of this attractiveness of the image of China as an emerging technological power. And one example in Brazil that I think is very, very telling is the most popular Sunday show in the Brazilian television is on Globo TV. It's called Fantástico. And in September 2019, for 4 Sundays in a row, they have documentaries that were made in China about the marvelous achievements of China on technology. So we had high-speed trains, smart cities, online payments, electric cars, virtual medical diagnosis. So I think this is something that is emerging, and we are seeing Chinese companies from the technological sector increasing their presence in Latin America. We have Tencent that has invested in fintechs and technological companies from Argentina and Brazil. We have Didi, the competition of Uber that are in many countries in Latin America. We have Xiaomi, the phone producer. And of course, Huawei, with 5G, that is also present in many Latin American countries. So I think this question of technology is an interesting aspect of China soft power.
And Rob, to what extent are Confucius Institute an important element of China's public diplomacy? What are the main activities of Confucius Institutes and where are they most influential?
China's Confucius Institutes, CIs, are perhaps the best known institutional expressions of China's expanding global public diplomacy effort. CIs operate as receiving institutions for Chinese exchange students to Latin America and the Caribbean, and manage opportunities for students from the region to visit China. It is routine for CIs to run annual grant competitions for students to travel and study in China, participate in summer camps, or stay for more extended periods of training or study. The Confucius Institute's project got underway in 2004, with the first in Latin America founded in Mexico City in 2006. While some CIs have specific mandates, worldwide their curricular focus is to provide Mandarin language instruction and Chinese government-approved courses on Chinese history and civilization. In addition to facilitating exchanges, CIs also organize an annual calendar of Chinese cultural events and workshops, frequently together with Chinese embassy and other China-focused organizations. And finally, they regularly serve as public settings for visits abroad by prominent Chinese diplomats. In contrast to other parts of the world, such as North America and Europe, where Confucius Institutes have been closing in significant numbers, Latin America and the Caribbean have experienced gradual but steady growth in the number of CIs. The region now boasts 44 such institutes in 21 countries. Brazil leads the way with 11, followed by Mexico with 5, Peru with 4, and Argentina and Chile with 3 apiece. China has indicated its plans to continue to expand the number of CIs throughout the region. International critics of Confucius Institutes have pointed to important differences when comparing CIs to other national cultural diplomacy institutions. If these also receive at least partial financial support from their respective governments, organizations like the British Council are not understood to be directly promoting the national interest, since they operate as institutionally separate and relatively independent nonprofits. CIs, however, operate with a different model from these others in that they are physically located on university campuses, and each CI is the result of an agreement between a host university and Chinese counterpart university. China's government and the host university typically share startup costs for a given CI, with the Chinese counterpart university providing teaching faculty. For example, the first Brazilian CI, founded in 2008, relies upon an interinstitutional relationship between Sao Paulo State University and Hubei University, located in Wuhan. The CI at the Pontifical Catholic University of Chile, founded in 2009, is a collaboration with Nanjing University. El Salvador's only CI, founded in 2019 at the University of El Salvador, works closely with the Southwest University of Science and Technology in Sichuan. And finally, the CI at Argentina's National University of Cordoba, stood up in 2020, is a shared undertaking with Jinan University in Guangzhou. Confucius Institutes have been described as instruments of Chinese cultural diplomacy, and so a means for the international projection of Chinese soft power through the promotion of the Chinese language, people, characteristic cultural beliefs, activities, and policies. The Chinese government describes its Confucius Institute program as a non-profit public agency affiliated with the Chinese Ministry of Education. As such, Confucius Institutes are often compared to cultural diplomacy organizations from other countries, such as the British Council, Alliance Française, the Japan Foundation, Spain's Cervantes Institute, or Germany's Goethe Institute. To give you a sense of the content of the cultural curriculum of a Confucius Institute, at the CI located at the University of Buenos Aires in Argentina, there is a total of 19 courses listed in its online catalog, featuring such topics as traditional Chinese medicine, Confucian thought, the I Ching, Tai Chi, Feng Shui, or the Beijing Opera, among other topics. In Latin America and the Caribbean, Confucius Institutes play an important role in laying the groundwork for deepening China's business relations with the region. In so doing, they function as institutional conduits to promote China's economic agenda by serving as channels for interested students from the region to seek professional opportunities with Chinese companies and for Chinese companies to recruit employees from the region. Courses on the language of quote-unquote business Chinese, how to interact with Chinese business partners, and how to leverage business opportunities with Chinese companies are now common features of regional Confucius Institute curricula. In their outreach and promotion to attract students, CIs promote study abroad programs in business settings and advertise themselves as a means to develop business skills directly transferable to the job market. CIs often offer classes of varying lengths, up to 8 weeks, intended to assist students in acquiring the interpersonal skills, practical and cultural knowledge for effective business transactions with Chinese companies.
Please go ahead, Monica.
I would just add, one of the things that I think is interesting is, as Rob says, the Confucius Institutes have not been as controversial in Latin America and have proliferated and gained significant institutional presence. And yet alongside them has also been a proliferation of sort of private sector initiatives by different both Chinese diasporic and other kinds of Latin American business institutions that are trying to forge language learning, cultural exchange, and especially for reasons of business and cultural exchange that I think in some ways play an important role in proliferating the visions of China that exist on the ground, the ways that language learning is sort of incorporated into coming to know China. And I'm thinking, for example, especially in Central America, of one big lawsuit that happened in Costa Rica between a Taiwanese woman who had a language learning institute called the Confucius Institute before China came to town. And when it did and tried to establish its Confucius Institute in the University of Costa Rica, a lawsuit ensued over who could bear the official name of Confucius Institute. She was actually eventually told she had to change the name of her institute in order to not reproduce this proprietary name that the Chinese government and Hanban had for its institutional presence. But the success of her institution has been far greater than the Confucius Institute in terms of enrollment numbers, in terms of the other kinds of initiatives that it spawned on the ground in terms of language and cultural learning. So when we think about the public diplomacy impact, I think there's also been a wide variety of private sector initiatives that are increasingly maybe not competing with, but certainly diffusing the way that China is being known on the ground through language.
That's a fascinating story. Claudia, you also have a comment on that.
The fact that the Confucius Institutes operate inside universities, what I see in Brazil is that the presence of the Confucius Institutes give space to other kind of academic engagement between the university, that is the host of the Confucius Institute, and the university in China to which the particular Confucius Institute is connected. And I think it's an interesting development, and it's not focused exclusively in the question of language or culture. You have academic cooperation in many different areas.
Are partnerships among cities and states playing a new role in international cooperation among China and Latin America? Why and what forms do this take?
China relations with the world is becoming more and more diverse. Now you have a growing number of actors that are present abroad and engaged in international relations. And besides the Confucius Institute, we have a growing number of universities and think tanks making connections all over the world. And we saw, especially in the last 15 years, a great increase of Chinese investments abroad. And these investments and the exports to China, this economic activity creates new links between China and other countries, especially at the subnational level. And in Brazil, that is very true. Like China is the main destination of exports for many states. And I think the most interesting case of subnational cooperation is the case of São Paulo, which is Brazil's most powerful, richest state. It accounts for roughly 1/3 of Brazil's GDP and is the leading destination of Chinese investments in Brazil. And since 2019, the government of São Paulo has an office in Shanghai to attract Chinese investments and to promote the state's exports to China. And with the COVID pandemic, there was a deepening in the relationship between the state of São Paulo and China. In 2020, when Brazil still did not know where it would get a vaccine, the state laboratories from São Paulo, it's called Butantan, closed a deal with Sinovac, the manufacturer of the Chinese vaccine CoronaVac. And as a result, CoronaVac was the first vaccine against COVID that was administered in Brazil. And this year, the laboratory would start the production of CoronaVac in a new factory. And the expectation is that it will produce 100 million doses per year, and most of them will be exported to Latin America and Africa. And the growing economic links led to an increase in public diplomacy and political contacts. And I think one very interesting aspect of China's public diplomacy is the expansion of courses and seminars that China offers to officials at the national and state level. And although United States and Europe continue to be the main destination of Latin American students that go abroad, I think we are seeing an steady increase of the number of students in China.
Monica, please.
Just wanted to build on Claudia's great note about the subnational initiatives and the way that they're proliferating, both the kinds of actors representing China in Latin America and also representing Latin America in China, and draw attention to sort of the question of paradiplomacy and city-to-city work that's happening among mayors, really taking advantage of China's very regimented, centralized government, but the role that mayors and, again, provincial leaders have in dispensing budgets, and the way that Latin American mayors may also be playing in connecting directly to their counterparts in China in order to engage questions of urban interest, at the local level. This includes things like local transport, urban transport issues. In Bogota, for example, trying to think about different monorail or light rail or gondola systems that will help with regional transport. In Mexico City as well, in Costa Rica, I know in San Jose as well. While there's a lot of Chinese infrastructure projects that are negotiated at a bilateral level or through bidding at the national level by Chinese firms, these kinds of initiatives are really about people to people at the urban level, mayors talking to one another along with other local business leaders in order to come up with projects. And one example I'll use is the Chinatown project in San Jose, Costa Rica, which was inaugurated in 2012. That project was the brainchild, supposedly, of Costa Rica's mayor at the time, Johnny Araya, who went to his counterpart in China and really worked with the mayor of Beijing in order to get funding, which was small at the time, but to help build the infrastructure of a Chinatown that, again, I'll highlight, brings questions of status and connection to a global China to local leaders in Latin America and allows them to begin to parlay some of that global significance of China into their own both political trajectories, but also the fates of their urban constituencies, especially as it has a lasting legacy in terms of infrastructure on the urban landscape.
Claudia, you leading the Brazil-China Business Council, I'm sure you are really close to this dynamic of the business delegations.
Well, I think in another moment I would be very close, but I started working at the China-Brazil Business Council in July 2020 at the height of the pandemic. So we are not having trips between China and Brazil since then. And most of our contacts are virtual contacts. I hope to have more of this experience when COVID is under control, and I hope it will happen soon. I think Monica's point to this role of the sister cities, it's very interesting. And I think like China, as a developing country, I think it has some solutions that are appealing to Latin American cities. And I think one of the areas that are very promising are electrification of mobility. China is a leader in electric vehicles, have most of the electric buses in the world, and is playing a role in Latin America, selling this equipment to Santiago that until recently had the largest fleet of electric buses outside China, and also in Colombia, that also is going to the same path.
I would like to thank you for listening to the China's Message podcast. Thank you also to the speakers, Robert Albro, Monica DeHart, and Claudia Trevisan. We hope that you can also tune in to the previous 2 episodes of the podcast, which considered Latin Americans' engagements with China Digital Silk Road and the nature of COVID-19 diplomacy in the region. These podcasts are produced by the American University with the support of the Institute for War and Peace Reporting, with funding provided by the U.S. Department of State. Follow us on Twitter at AU_CLALS and keep the conversation going.